We are going to be talking a little bit about abstraction. This is the next module coming up. I wanted to first ask if everybody was doing well so far. I wanted to know how well your week was going. If you are having some concerns uh, about workload or anything like that, please give me a call or contact me through email. Um, the sooner you talk to me, the better. And the on-campus Office of Student Accommodations is really good about working with students to help make sure that you guys have best workload that you can. I hope you have a really good Easter coming up and are enjoying your spring. Today, though, this afternoon, I noticed that it was snowing again, which is awesome. Today, we're going to be talking about abstraction. And I wanted to uh, reiterate again that when I do the grading and stuff, if you see zeros, please double check and make sure you get those assignments turned in. And if you have resubmitted and I haven't graded it, please email me and let me know. I'll get on it just as soon as I can. This module, we're going to be talking about another art movement. Remember, we talked about the difference between art periods and art movements. Art periods are generally longer, cover a geographical area, and deal with issues of the prevailing society. Uh, and art movements generally are limited to the artists that are involved, are much shorter period of time, 10 to 50 years, rather than hundreds of years like in an art period. And art movements generally deal with ideas rather than the issues of a culture at large. When we are talking about abstraction, I think that it's important to realize that there's two different things that we're talking about. One is the process of creating art that is abstracted. That's the dog whining. She wants my attention, but I just gave her a treat, and so she's being a booger. But the other is there is a specific period that is labeled in art history as the abstract art movement and generally thought to have started about 1910. Um, there's different ideas about that, but we'll be talking about that a little bit during this module. Abstract. I wanted to show you something before we get going into this. I wanted to show you a short slideshow that I put together where we talk about it that shows what abstraction is. Abstraction is essentially any time an artist portrays something that is simplified from the original or is not directly related to an original thing. So it's not necessarily a distorted object. It's not necessarily um, something in an odd perspective. And abstraction means that it takes a little bit of thinking to recognize essentially what it is if it begins from a point of reference, a physical point of reference. Now I'm going to try to share my screen here really quick. Let's see if we can do this. Let's see if I can. I'll try to share Windows screen or tab. Let's do that. Sorry, this is a little bit frustrating. There we go. All right, here we are. So you can see this PowerPoint that I've done. I'm going to turn it into a slideshow. If I can find out how to do that. Okay, here we go. Hopefully you guys can see this. This is a painting of a tree. And we can identify it as a tree. We see the trunk here. We see realistic looking leaves. We see some little branches coming off here. We see a faded background back here. Off to the right, there's looks like some reflective water. But we read this pretty easily as a tree. Now, these, of course, are trees as well. This is from the Hudson River School of Painting in the US. The trees, if they are distorted at all, it's designed to make for a rather uh, romantic type of scene where it fills you with nostalgia, but you can still recognize these things very readily as trees. And here we go to the next step where we see the tree design is made into almost a symbolic pattern. When you look at these leaves, all the leaves are almost identical. Most of them are green, a couple are blue. It varies a little bit. See, the flowers that are in the tree are red and they're very frontal facing, rather unnatural looking. Around the edge, we see flowers from their sides. See birds staying perfectly still, and they're either in profiles or they're profiles with their heads turned. But even though this reads as a tree, you can see it is definitely different from that other tree that we saw. The branches are very stylized and smooth, and again, all the leaves are almost identical. So this we're approaching abstraction, but we're still looking at it as a stylized tree. Now here, this is a very symbolic tree. We can read it as a tree. This is a state flag. I believe it's New Hampshire. But we can see that here's this kind of fuzzy triangle that's green that reads as the canopy of the tree. It looks like a pine tree, something like that, or an evergreen. See a very straight trunk, and we see the root ball at the bottom of it. Now this is still reads as a tree, but now instead of becoming just a symbol, it's also becoming abstracted a bit too. So this reads as a symbol of a tree that we can identify as a tree readily. This is Japanese kanji. This is a symbol that represents tree. See, the vertical line is the trunk. The two diagonal lines are the tree canopy, and that horizontal line is the horizon. So it's still based on a tree as the originating source, but it's very abstracted now. And it's abstracted to the point where the entire tree is communicated with just four lines. And this is when we start seeing abstraction. This is very abstracted. And here, the trees, and I think they're poplars. I know the artist of this. She said that was a valid interpretation. But on the right-hand side, the only thing that we can really identify these things as trees, being trees, is the strokes of color. So this is very abstracted to the point where we can't even recognize the original origin anymore, other than there's the color. Now here is a tree done by the first artist we're going to look at. His name is Pete Mondrian. This is actually a layout, or I'm not going to say layout. This is actually a landscape image that he did, and it doesn't look like that at all. But I'll show you what he's thinking in the next slide or so. But he tried to take landscapes, and he was living in a world at the beginning of the 19th century that felt very chaotic. We talked about how quickly people were able to travel. This in the first part of the 19th century or 20th century. This is when a lot of technological advances started happening, piling one on top of another. People started getting telephones in their own homes. You could go almost anywhere in the world in less than 3 months. And it was a lot of people crowded together and living together. And Pete Mondrian started a path where he was simplifying what he saw down to white and black, the primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, and sometimes he would use green. And we can't, I mean, this is abstracted to the point where it's almost impossible to see where the tree is, other than the idea that maybe that blue square is a tree. But here we see the evolution of Pete Mondrian's paintings. The top left, this looks very impressionistic. We just finished that section, that module. See, the tree is easy to see on the top left, but the colors are a little bit distorted, and he's used dots for the painting strokes instead of making it smooth. The one on the top middle, when you see he's changed the colors, he's removed most of the colors until it's just basically black, white, and gray. Top right, he's changed and distorted the shape of the tree, so now he's simplified a lot of the branches so that they're just loops instead of the jaggedy lines. And the colors are more in that cream kind of and taupe or warm kind of field. There's no bright or startling colors. Bottom left, we see that he's distorted that tree so that it's just a bunch of squares almost, where all the branches, he simplified all the branches so that they're either horizontal or vertical lines. And the color palette is a lot simpler as well. We see a little bit of blue, but most of the colors are kind of shades of that light brown. In the bottom middle, we can see that he simplified the tree even more. This is still the same tree, believe it or not, but it's abstracted to horizontal and vertical lines only and squares of color. And this, it looks like he's using four or five colors. He has the white square towards the center. He has kind of an off-white green, an off-white taupe, an off-white blue, and then this yellow kind of thing. And then the bottom right, we see he's going to those primary colors. He has that kind of reddish thing, almost an yellowish orange, the white, gray, and black. He's only using vertical and horizontal lines. So in the top left, we see this impressionist tree that still we can recognize easily as a tree. The bottom right, it's abstracted or simplified to the point where it's almost impossible to recognize it as an actual thing, an actual tree to begin with. I'm sorry, I stopped sharing, and then now I'm trying to get, there we go. Technology. But as we look at that, you can kind of see how abstraction really changes the thing, whatever the subject is that the artist is working with, into something that is not recognizable easily as that original subject. Sometimes it's more recognizable than others. Abstraction basically means simplifying, but you don't even need to start with things in the physical world. You can use ideas. I think a lot of Piet Mondrian's work was working with ideas and trying to use an initial subject as a way or as a pathway to express the idea that he was directly addressing. Another artist that you'll be learning about is a gentleman named Wassily Kandinsky. He also started doing very naturalistic looking things. And he started being more and more fascinated. Piet Mondrian was trying to simplify things to horizontal and vertical lines. Wassily Kandinsky was more interested with just exploring areas of color. And if you look at, he had a series of paintings that he did, and I think they were called improvisations, where he would just try to paint in the same way that a jazz musician makes music, responding to what's in front of him, responding to the feel of the paint, and making shapes that feel appropriate. So his paintings weren't intended to be a simplified tree after a while. They were just basically explosions or fireworks of color. And so when you get to that part of the module, realize these people are not trying to express something specific. They're trying to express their way of viewing the world through painting essentially raw ideas instead of specific subject matters. Now, the typical narrative in art history talks about abstraction being something that came onto the art scene about 1910 in Europe. And what we're finding out is that is not really true. There was a woman named Hilma af Klint who started painting. She was born in 1860s, 62, I think. She started painting about maybe 30 years before art abstraction as an art movement was recognized in 1910. And what she did was, I think she was influenced, it looks to me like she was influenced by traditional alchemical illustrations that were used as basically diagrams or ways of teaching alchemy students. And it looks like she also was influenced a little bit by what Byron did when he was doing his symbolist paintings. And that's another field entirely. But what she started doing, even though she started out as a naturalist painter, and that's what she continued doing, and that's what she sold on her own, she started making paintings where she used shapes like spirals and triangles and just explored fields of color instead of trying to make something that related directly to the visible world. She was expressing emotions. She was trying to paint how she felt or how she imagined other people would feel. She was trying to paint ideas that we can't really nail down with specific words. So her work is when you look at it, it's very abstract. But unfortunately for the art historians that had already published their textbooks, her stuff was hidden for a while and then was refound fairly recently, and kind of came on the scene in an exhibit in 2018, I believe. And she was doing what Pete Mondrian and Wassily Kandinsky were credited with having started. She was doing that 20 years before they started the abstraction movement as it's recognized today. And if we really look at it, since abstraction is essentially simplifying the naturalistic world, remember those cave paintings we were looking at that were done before people identified themselves as people. Those cave paintings, there are symbols, there are fields of color, there are abstracted animals that were recorded and laid down. We know that our ancestors could do naturalistic things. In many of these cave paintings, you can see very naturalistic looking animals, but the human beings, for the most part, are simplified. Weapons or implements or hunting tools are very simplified. That one Dr. Genevieve that we talked about um, identified a couple dozen symbols that were being used as part of the cave painting art. We look at the patterns developed in oceanic cultures. Um, we look at the individual strokes for Confucian painting. These are very abstract lines, and you can see in that Confucius and in the Japanese painting that we saw, you can see very abstracted imagery in the painting, um, becoming a stylized way of expressing the natural world. So I don't think, hey, sorry, she's doesn't want to share her bone with one of the other little teeny tiny puppies. But and people have been doing this, abstracting intentionally, for thousands of years. We look at the Egyptian paintings. I'm going to sneeze. Hold on. Excuse me. Look at the Egyptian paintings, and I mentioned that some of the genre scenes, like on just in the farm or in the landscape, people are very naturalistic looking. But then you get into some of these areas that are supposed to be um, like very serious historical references in the tomb paintings. Then there's a religious canonization of the human figure that we see, where the human figure is distorted and abstracted somewhat. So even though uh, abstraction as an art movement, we can argue about that a little bit. I think the beginning of it was probably closer to 1880 rather than 1910. That perspective is a very something called cultural centric, where a culture, the either the prevailing culture of the time or the culture that's able to afford the publication so that everybody knows that they're the guys in charge, that culture believes that it is the one that has the right to make the definitions of how to understand the world. And that's not a bad thing. I All of us have that right to make definitions about how we see the world. But when we start saying things like smart people think this way or everybody knows, those are indications of a cultural centric way of viewing the world that kind of dismiss other perspectives because they don't fit into the paradigm that is either established or being established. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is something that we need to be aware of as we look at the world with that critical eye that we talked about way at the beginning of the semester. The four tools that we use for critiquing artwork. we can use that way of critical thinking to explore the world around us and get a better sense of what reality really is. So I would say that abstraction, when we start taking things and paying attention to raw color, simplifying a shape, um, that has been around since before time was time, essentially. Look at the cave paintings, the colors that were used were limited to the dyes that the artists had available, that kind of yellow, kind of brown, kind of red or black, and sometimes white. And that in itself, limiting the color palette, helps to abstract. When we start distorting images, but still trying to communicate something, that's a symptom of abstraction as well. It's characteristic of abstraction. And and we can see that a lot in cartooning. For example, if you look at anime, there's a lot of abstraction that goes on in anime for way of creating the characters. Hey, hey, hey! She's not going to hurt you. The dog is being the rather large terrier is being intimidated by a little teeny 5 pound chihuahua, and it's kind of fun to see. But we can look at it from a couple different perspectives. But I want you to be aware in this module of the art history as it's been recorded from a European or Eurocentric point of view. The the fact that Hilma, her paintings, when they reemerge, it looks like, even though Vasily Kandinsky is one of the people that is considered a founder of the abstraction movement in Europe, it looks like from her paintings and knowing how much earlier that her stuff was done, it looks like he actually saw some of her work and it really amazed him and intrigued him. And he didn't copy any of her work, but it looks like he was inspired by her stuff. And when you see her stuff and look at some of Wasily's paintings, you can really see that. And this isn't a bad thing at all. Artists talk to each other all the time. They shared ideas. That's really a good thing. That's what allowed the art movements, to inform so many different artists and pretty well develop into our understanding of art today. When you are going, so think about all these kinds of things. Abstraction being essentially simplification, but also being painting things that don't have a toehold in the physical or visible world. Think about art history and that definition of abstraction as a movement. Think about Pete Mondrian, Vasily Kandinsky, and Hilma of Klint, and their work that they did, and about what people do today in the artwork. There's a lot of abstraction that goes on in, like I said, anime, cartoons, advertising, a lot of that kind of stuff. For your reflection, what you'll need to do is think about all that and write it down. Um, Follow the directions for the reflection and make sure that you include each of those elements in the paragraph that you write. And we do need a paragraph of 3 to 5 sentences detailing your ideas. For your studio work, this is going to be a little bit more complicated. What you'll need to do is list some emotions. There's a list that's given, but I want you to think about it and come up with at least one of your own. You can use others from the list, but it doesn't have to be limited to that. I mean, there's at least 50 different words that deal just with the negative aspects of anger and frustration. So think about the kinds of emotions that you deal with and see if you can stretch that a little bit and just pick out of your list 4 words to use. You write those down, take a picture of that list, or you can type it out, or you can, when you submit this, submit it into the comments section. For each of those 4 emotions, what I want you to do is use your paper. You can use printer paper, you can use your notebook. Make 4 squares for each of these 4 emotions, excuse me. For each of the 4 emotions, make 3 squares that are about 2 to 4 inches on a side. So each of the squares will be about that big or so. And in for each of those four emotions, I want you to do a thumbnail sketch. It's called just a rough sketch with your pencil or pen about what that emotion makes you think. And we are trying not to do something that is a recognizable symbol. So we don't want a peace symbol. We don't want a cross. We don't want anything like that. We don't want anything that's a recognizable object, like an antler or a deer or like a tire from a car. It might help to go back and look at online some of the images of Wassily Kandinsky's work, Pete Mondrian's work, and Hilma af Klint's work. Just look at some of the stuff that they've done. But what we're trying to do is not do a drawing of something, but we're using shape, line, form, and texture to create something new that you think kind of encapsulates your expression of that emotion. So you're going to do 3 thumbnails for each of those 4 emotions. So you'll have a total of 12 thumbnails when you're done. And I want you to take a photo of those 12. If you do them all on the same piece of paper, that can really help. But again, each of these thumbnails needs to be, you need to draw a square and then draw the thumbnail within the square so that the thumbnail is defined by the square. And that'll help you for the next step, which is you're going to look at each of those 3 thumbnails, and each collection of 3 thumbnails that have to do with one emotion, you're going to do a painting or a color drawing with what you have. Like you have those paints, or maybe you used markers for the kente cloth, or maybe you used colored pencils. That's fine. Use that. But I want you to do one painting using your um, thumbnail sketches, but I want you to make one painting for each of those 4 emotions. So you can have 4 paintings when you're done. And those paintings need to be in a 6-inch by 6-inch square. So about that, a little bit bigger than your thumbnails. And then you're going to take pictures of those 3 paintings. And those are the things you're going to be submitting. Now on this as well, we're supposed to be doing basically a small reflection on somebody else's artwork. And that's going to be really difficult to do until more people have submitted. Right now, there's only one person who has submitted the artwork for this. But these are called peer reviews. And I've given a little bit of outline for the peer reviews. The computer assigns you 3 other students. And for each of those 3 other students, I want you to write one positive sentence for each of the 3 of them that addresses one of those 4 aspects of the tools of artistic critique. Those 4 aspects are one sentence: describe, analyze, interpret, and evaluate. So you could write in your 3 peer reviews. The first peer review, you could write a 1-sentence description of what you see. In the second peer review, it's going to be on a different student. You're going to write 1-sentence analysis, describing how you think that person made what you see. And on the third one, maybe you could write a 1-sentence interpretation. What do you think it means that they did? Which emotion are you looking at? Or what emotions are these paintings showing? So if that works, we're gonna check it out, and by the end of, or by our meeting next week, we're going to look at it. And I would like you guys to email me about how easy or difficult this is. Don't worry about it. I just want you to tell me your experience. And then next week, if we find out that that's not going to work, then I will cut it out, and you get the points just for your regular submission. We're trying it out. I think I understand how it works. If it's not working, let me know. And again, I said, you're not going to be, if you can't get it to work, or if it's too frustrating for you, then we're going to take it off of the grading thing. Okay. But we want to try it out and see if we can get it to work. Oh, and this is one of the puppies. She just sat up here. Can you see her? Everybody say hi. This is Tia. She's very sweet. But so that's what we're going to be doing for that. Again, if it's a problem, don't panic or anything like that. Let me know and email me and tell me why it's a problem. And if it's too much of a frustration for everybody, or if the system is not working correctly, like I said, I will cut it out of the assignment. All right. So I think that's everything I wanted to cover. Again, the things that you need to turn in is your word list, the 4 words of emotions, the 12 all and images of all 12 of your thumbnails. That's a small black and white pencil or pen sketches with 3 of them for each of the 4 emotions, and each of the 4 emotions that you've picked, and then 4 paintings, and that's 1 painting for each of the 4 emotions. If that's unclear, let me know. I think it is pretty clear. The only thing I'm concerned about is the peer review stuff. If that's not working, tell me, and we'll get it fixed for next week, or we'll remove it altogether, depending on if it's too much of a pain in the neck. If you guys have any questions about this, go through the module and then email me, and the common questions I will address next time we get together, right? I hope you guys have an absolutely wonderful week, and I look forward to visiting with you all next Tuesday. So we'll see you later.